All right, so building a connection rapport basic series part 2. All right, so building positive relationships. Why are building positive resident relationships worth your time and energy? Okay, so that's a question that we're going to kind of start with is why are building positive resident relationships worth your time and energy? So I'm going to go to the chat box so you can unmute yourself, and I just want to get your feedback. Why do you feel it's important to build a positive resident relationship? Why is it worth it instead of just kind of listening to them and hopefully that's the end of it? Let's see what you got to say.
I think it's important because it helps with resident retention, helps also with kind of the reputation of the community, because when the residents like the community, they talk highly of us, and helps with resident events. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to need to stop skipping ahead and reading my slides, but thank you. No, that's a great answer. That's very true. It helps with resident retention, and like Destiny said, it mentions Prosper, that it really does help with reviews and making sure that people are getting referred to us. So there we go. So residents, why it's important, why it's worth their time and energy. It helps residents feel comfortable, confident, and trustworthy in you, of our teams and what we're doing for them. It creates a positive space for communication with the on-site teams. It helps out where they're able to come and talk to you about anything, whether it be, unfortunate complaint, or maybe it's hey, I really want to, have somebody move here, or I don't know if I can renew based on this rate. It helps create a positive space for both sides to where we have better experiences, instead of having that irate person come to the office, or somebody just doesn't doesn't renew because they didn't feel comfortable talking to the on-site team. Helps them renew with confidence, just like Destiny said, and also it allows them to refer new leads and leave positive reviews with positive experiences. So great. All right. So having a space for positive communication goes both ways. So it's our job to make sure our residents feel they can effectively be heard and communicate with us in concerns to the living experience at our communities. So there are 3 questions I want you to ask yourself. So this is where I said that since I have 3 properties on the line, I'm going to assign each question to you guys. So for Towers Woodland, your question is going to be, is our office team accessible? And when has your office team not been accessible? What's an example of when you guys were not able to be accessible? For Mansions Prosper, your question is, when has our team not been approachable? What are some examples of how you were not approachable as a team or your office? And then for Mansions, Mercer Crossing, Chris and Katrina, you guys can get together if you feel like it, or answer through the chat. What's an example of how your team was not welcoming? Okay, so those are the 3 questions. What are some examples of when you may not have been accessible, when you may not have been approachable, and when you may not have been welcoming? So I'll give you guys, a minute or 2 to discuss amongst yourself. And whenever you're ready, just unmute yourself and we can go forward. And I know we're not all perfect, so there have been at least some examples when we've not been one of the 2.
I mean, from Towers Woodland, we would say the only time that we wouldn't be accessible is the full office staff being with residents and current prospects, and just someone else walking in, just where we wouldn't be able to help them right away. We always greet to let them know we'll be right with you, but that would be the only time that we would not be accessible. Other than that, we are always here for our residents and new prospects.
Okay, perfect. So you guys, when you're with other people, it's really hard to not always be accessible all the time, especially whenever you have residents that want that answer, want that thing from you right away when they come into the office. So that is very common. Thank you.
So, Eric, to answer your question, I don't think that we've ever been unapproachable. I don't know if there's like a different scenario you're looking for, but I feel like the way all teams across our communities work, I think we're pretty approachable. That would say at least 99.9% of the time.
Okay. All right, that's great to hear. I'll be honest, whenever I was on site, I was not, as a manager, I was not always accessible. As a leasing agent, I may not have always been approachable. Maybe after a bad call or after a bad text message from a family member or significant other. Let's see, let's go to welcoming. How about Manchester Mercer Crossing? You guys can either unmute yourself or you can type in the chat box. Is there any time maybe you feel like you weren't welcoming? Or not you in particular, but an example of how we may not be welcoming. I see Chris's audio trying to get figured out there. Hey, feel free to use the chat box if you need to as well, Chris. All right, so we're going to pause for a minute and let him chat and type in the chat box and go forward a little bit. But just as an example of how we may not be welcoming, at times that you may have that resident that comes in that always complains, maybe curses, maybe yells, and we're like, oh, it's your turn to deal with this person today. I'm not dealing with them. I dealt with them yesterday. It's your turn now. So we don't always have that welcoming spirit per se when it comes to some of our residents. So that's just an example of maybe nobody's doing it across the board, but I can guiltily say I've done that as a past leasing agent in the past. All right, so being accessible. So there's nothing worse than needing to speak to a manager. Oh, wait, we got an answer from Chris. Let's see what he says before I go forward. During resident events as we multitask. That's a really good one, Chris. Yeah, we may not come across as welcoming as we'd like to, especially during resident events, because you're trying to make sure it's put together, and then it's usually going on at the same time during your office hours, so you're not even able to mingle or get to know or network with your residents like you normally would. That's a perfect example. Thank you. Accessible. So there's nothing worse than needing to speak to a manager and having to wait around for them to be available to get the runaround. So we get calls all the time for a manager or maybe the assistant manager because they want to talk about rent being late. And as leasing agents, our job is to kind of filter those calls before they get to the assistant and manager to kind of see what we can do to answer those questions. Because a lot of times our residents don't understand that we can actually answer those questions as leasing agents. So sometimes the managers or assistants aren't accessible, and we're giving people not the runaround, but it feels like it for them. Oh, they'll contact you back a little bit, or I'll have them call you back when they get back in the office. They call back again. Oh, they're still not here, and so on. So there are times that we are not accessible when it comes to that. So in order to keep our connection positive with our residents, it's in our best interest always to ensure that you're letting them be heard, valuing their time, and being honest. I've sat in office recently, or maybe in the past couple of months, where I've overheard calls in the office where a leasing agent told the resident the manager was out for the day because the manager said, "Hey guys, I'm busy today. I can't see anybody. So yeah, handle it." And the leasing agents, didn't know how to really explain to a resident that the manager said this. So they said, "Oh, the manager's out for the day, so not in the office." So as I'm overhearing this, the resident so happens to walk into the office to see the property manager behind the desk. So just so you guys know, just make sure that you're being honest. Honesty is your best policy when it comes to being accessible and when it comes to talking to your residents, because you never know when they are going to walk in. So as far as some resolutions for being accessible, try to resolve the issue if possible first. Whenever you talk to your residents, be empathetic, listen to what they're having to say, see if you can break it down and see if you can give them some type of solution before having them wait to talk to a manager who may not be accessible. You being accessible first is the first point of contact. Offer to set up an appointment with them, giving realistic expectations on a follow-up. So if they are going to need to only speak to a manager, let them know, okay, let's set up a time for you to talk to the manager. She's not in today, or she is, her schedule is full for today. Let's see if we can schedule an appointment for you tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Will that work? And then let them know that they'll call them in the morning. So you're letting them know realistic expectations of when a manager can follow up back with them. So our managers are not in the office 24/7 and could be out on property. So also utilize your assistant managers. Your assistant managers are a great resource to go to when it comes to assisting residents. They've been in your shoes. They've seen these situations. They know how to handle a lot of the situations that your manager is always handling as well. And it's also great training for them too whenever they step into that role as a property manager. They're being able to experience these live experiences. So also utilize your assistant managers if the resident cannot wait. Next one is approachable. So approachable. So though approachable and welcoming go hand in hand, being approachable can really make a difference in your residents receiving an excellent customer service. So for many residents, language can be a barrier. They may want to wait for a Spanish speaking agent to become available. So by going that extra mile, do what you can to communicate with them using maybe Google Translate or a specific translator app. Trust me, the resident will appreciate your willingness to help. So being approachable in those type of ways, by going above and beyond, will really help out when it comes to your resident relations. Greet everyone the same. Make eye contact, use their names, give them your undivided attention. This helps create a bond with our residents and show you care, and be ready to show empathy and earn their trust. So every resident relation or experience that comes in, it's not just something, oh, this resident had to deal with this, oh, this resident had this complaint. It's always a new way for us to make sure that we're earning their trust as a resident. Welcoming. So many times how we feel can shape the language we use and frame the conversation we're dealing with a resident. For example, when we have that rude resident who always comes in to complain, we know this resident. Usually we take turns in the office on who's going to deal with them. So am I the only one that's guilty that's done this before? Have you guys ever said, oh, it's your turn. It's 5:01. I'm not getting yelled at today. I dealt with them yesterday. It's your turn. You do it today. So just maybe a show of hands. Anybody ever done that? Okay. I'm seeing some hands there. So yeah, so we've all done this. All right. So it's usually the, oh, it's your turn conversation in the office. So many times we start the conversation with, I've got an angry resident on the phone or at my desk. Whenever we start that conversation with that language, we are immediately filled with a sense of dread that impacts our approach and how we welcome them to help. So we might even say it puts us in a defense mode because we're knowing this resident's already going to be upset, they're angry, they're cursing. So we're already, all right, let's go. I got my gloves on, I'm ready to go here. What's going to happen? So it already puts us in defense mode, which allows us to get out of empathy, allows us from being approachable and welcoming. So you might even, by being aware of how our language, by being aware of how we welcome and approach the resident, it allows us to take control of our language and our tone. So try referring to this resident as an anxious resident instead of angry. When someone is anxious, we take a step back and we're more patient with that person. So just try a different approach when it comes to that. So meet each resident with an open mind and clear emotions. Remember, the words you use to describe your resident can shape how you feel about them. So that angry resident, it already puts an image on them and how we feel about them and how we're going to communicate with them going forward. So that's why I said try a different approach. Maybe try anxious, so we know this person is up and down sometimes, and may give you a little bit more empathy and patience when it comes to that person. All right, positive space for communication. Tips on staying positive with an anxious resident. So 1, discipline your emotions, practice empathy, and just breathe. So disciplining your emotions, that sounds easy enough, right? So you got to learn to regulate your emotions when dealing with an anxious resident. So first things first, remember their issue and how they feel about their situation is not personal. There isn't a need to allow our customer to take us from a good emotional state to their level. Make yourself immune to not catching their mood. So just remember, when you're tired, when you're not feeling well, it's easy to allow yourself to lose focus. So know where you stand mentally. When you come in for the day and you know that you're already up to here with stress because of what happened, on the way to work, maybe somebody cut you off and you're just already over the day and it's barely 9 a.m. Kind of know where you stand. If you know you're not feeling well and you have the sniffles or you're coughing nonstop or you just have a big migraine, know where you are mentally and where you are physically before you start working with everybody, because where your emotions are going to trigger you from going from maybe a 2 to a 8 really fast on the anger scale. So just know where you're at. Make sure you discipline your emotions. Remember, the things that cause a resident to get to an anxious state is usually frustration or loss of control. So it's not you, it's not the property, it's not personal, it's just that situation, it's just frustration or loss of control. So this is where empathy comes into play. So we hear it all the time. Make sure to be empathetic. But what does that really mean to you? So I'm going to ask you guys to unmute yourself, and I want to hear a couple different, I don't need to hear from everybody, but just a couple different feedback from you guys. What does practicing empathy mean to you?
I would say putting yourself in someone else's shoes, trying to understand their side before coming at them from our side, stating facts. I think when you sympathize with other people and relate to their level, it makes you empathize with why their emotions are what they are.
Like our elevator's down right now, so that's a great example.
You said what's down right now?
Our elevator, so residents are really upset about it, which of course, like, it's valid, but instead of like us saying, well, it's a machine, it's gonna break, like, we have to be like, we completely understand why you're frustrated. We're doing like everything we can to get it taken care of quickly.
I love it. That's a perfect example. And to be honest, the reason why I chuckled, because I thought you said our alligator is out right now.
Which that also could happen at the Towers Woodland, but no. No alligator today, just an elevator.
Okay, I was like, whoa. So for you guys in Dallas and Prosper, they actually have an alligator that is, in the back of their property.
We
Count
There's
five.
five.
plural, not
Yeah.
singular.
Yes.
And
There's
Five
more than one.
alligators.
Yes.
So I thought that was for sure. I was like, whoa, okay, well, yeah, I definitely understand why they would be.
Elevator, not alligator.
Got it. How about you guys, Manchester, Prosper? What do y'all think? What does practicing empathy mean to you?
Kind of like Towers Woodland said, coming from a place of understanding instead of defense. It's easy to get really defensive when people come at you sideways. So I think it's important to come from a place of understanding and trying to kind of put yourself in their shoes to understand what they're going through.
Perfect. No, both of those are great answers. So being empathetic is, like Katie said, putting yourselves into the resident's shoes. Refrain from quoting policy, pointing fingers, watch your posture and body language. So this is something that we jump to a lot because we know our policy, we know our community policies and rules. So we get straight to, oh, well, you know what? Our community policy that you signed on this date says blah, 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 blah. So just be careful of that. Be careful of pointing who's to blame. We don't want to do that. We want to make sure that we are going into an empathetic state of mind and showing that empathy so we can acknowledge their feelings, that we're truly listening. At the end of the day, our residents are just like anyone else. They just want to be heard. So when it comes to practicing empathy, our responses should be just like some of the stuff that Destiny said, those are great. Some other responses are, I see where you're coming from, or I'd be upset if this happened to me too. Let's find a solution. You're important to us, and I want to be part of the solution. So also what Haley said with the elevator, we're working on this as soon as possible. We do understand your frustration. Those like that are just ways that we're allowing them to be heard, and we understand where they're coming from and their frustration. We're not ignoring it. We're not devaluing it. We're taking it into consideration. So those are all great, you guys. So just breathe. Just breathe. So when the resident visit is over, or if you must put the resident on hold, take a few deep breaths, inhale, exhale, give yourself that moment to discipline your emotions and rephrase your response. Trust me that 3 seconds to rethink how you can respond can make all the difference. Have you guys ever had a call with a resident and you were getting yelled at and this person was complaining, and without kind of giving a valid solution or empathizing, you kind of went up to their level because you felt like you were getting disrespected, you went into defense mode. So those are really easy to get to. I'm guilty of that as well. I'm very much a person that I ride on all my emotions. So when it comes to those moments, take a deep breath, tell them you'll be right back, put them on hold, walk to the back, breathe, let it out, let it go, know that it's not about you, and then go back and then actually help. If it helps you out as well, after the visit, after they've already left, go to your manager's office or your assistant office and just debrief with them. Let it out. Don't hold it in. And then go on to the next person you're working with. So it's always good just to breathe. Right. If all else fails and you forget to keep your cool, you forget to just breathe, emphasize, all the things we just talked about, you can think of one word and the acronym for this one word. So the one word is HEAT. So HEAT, H, hear and listen to what the resident is saying. E, empathize with the resident's complaint. A, apologize for the incident. And T, take ownership and find a solution to the concern or complaint. So that's a really easy one. So hear, empathize, apologize, take ownership. We are in the business of customer service to new and renewing residents. Our job is to deliver exceptional customer service. Our end goal is to create a positive relationship with our residents so that in turn we'll be able to renew with confidence. Our residents will want to refer family and friends or community and leave a positive review. So I'm going to leave you with a quote. So the quote is, to wow, you must differentiate yourself, which means do something a little unconventional and innovative. You must do something that's above and beyond what's expected, and whatever you do must have an emotional impact on the receiver. So our goal is to make sure that we're going above and beyond, and we're leaving them with some type of emotional impression that they're going to remember. So thank you guys for joining me today. Stay tuned for our last webinar in the 3-part series. Should be next week. Yeah, and this month's almost over. It's flying by. Thank you guys for joining today.
Thank you guys.
Bye-bye.